Hello and welcome to Dare to Know, interviews with quality and reliability thought leaders. I'm Tim Rogers, and today I'm pleased to welcome Tom Moriarty. Tom Moriarty is president of Alidade Maintenance, Engineering, and Reliability Incorporated. Founded in 2004, its mission is to help others lead full and satisfying lives through physical asset management and productive leadership principles. Tom became a member of the Society of Maintenance and Reliability Professionals in 2002 and is currently the Government Relations Committee Chairman, a Florida Chapter Board member, the Florida Central East District Director, and a CMRP since 2003. He has various credentials in RCM, root cause analysis, and predictive maintenance technologies. In 2018, he became an approved provider of productive leadership system training. Since 2008, Tom has been author of a monthly column on leadership in Plant Services magazine. In November 2019, his book, The Productive Leadership System, Maximizing Organizational Reliability, was published, and it's available through Amazon and Industrial Press. Tom earned a professional MBA in organizational development from the Florida Institute of Technology. He has a BS in mechanical engineering from Western New England University. He's a member of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers and a licensed professional engineer in Florida. Tom was a U.S. Coast Guardsman for 24 years, retiring as a naval engineering lieutenant commander in 2003. Prior to earning his commission, Tom was an enlisted machinery technician for over 9 years. In 2003, Tom was honored by the National Society of Professional Engineers by being selected U.S. Coast Guard Federal Engineer of the Year for his accomplishments, including initiating a condition monitoring and precision maintenance program. Tom Moriarty, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, good morning, Tim, and thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Tom, your book is titled The Productive Leadership System, Maximizing Organizational Reliability. What exactly is organizational reliability, and how is that different from the product reliability that most of our listeners are familiar with?
Right. So first, let me say that my background is in operations, maintenance, and reliability. Many years ago, I developed a basic model. The model was for improving maintenance and reliability. It had 4 phases, and the first 2 phases had to do with making sure that your asset data was correct, so hierarchy, criticality, and configuration management. And the second piece of it was to make sure that there was an effective core maintenance management process, typically including planning and scheduling. And so that had to be efficient and effective to be able to manage work properly. The
Right.
third phase was to then implement preventive and condition monitoring, preventative maintenance and condition monitoring. And then the fourth level was to then get to the advanced reliability and continuous improvement stuff. And however, a few years ago, I realized that there was a foundational step that supported all of these phases of the model. And within maintenance and reliability being just one function within an organization, it was clear that there had to also be some sort of a coordinating function that aligned all of the other functions that needed to be in place so that you could have coordinated behaviors that would result in a culture of teamwork and reliability and quality. And so the organizational reliability model was a foundational coordinating function that I ended up refining over the years. So regardless of what the group's function is within an organization, such as operations, maintenance, contracting, procurement, HR even, there has to be a model that supports accountability and alignment of these functions and the work centers that work within them. So maintenance and reliability professionals think of reliability as kind of the probability that equipment, machinery, or systems will perform to their required, perform their required functions satisfactorily under specific conditions. So the organizational reliability is really the probability that the organization as a whole will perform its functions satisfactorily under defined conditions. So in maintenance and reliability, the organizational reliability model, you need direction, mission, vision, values, and objectives, but you also need guidance. And I refer to guidance as being policies, plans, processes, procedures, and measures. And they require the assets needed to carry out that guidance. So the right number of personnel, the tools, equipment, software, information, etc. So when you boil down the difference between organizational and product reliability, it's that organizational reliability applies to the system that supports productive leadership in an organization or a group within the organization, and it applies to maintenance and reliability functions, but also to procurement, sales and marketing, engineering, shipping and receiving, etc. While maintenance and reliability, as understood within our community, is really focused on producing the right product or service at the right time, at the highest quality and lowest cost. So you can't do that without all of the coordinating functions of organizational reliability.
Tom, it sounds like what you're saying is that you may have a great product design, but reliability could be undermined as a result of a lack of organizational reliability.
Yeah, absolutely. So you think about, I think about organizational reliability as really providing accountability. And so the organizational reliability model really assigns accountability across each organizational leadership level. And so that is really the mortar that holds everything together.
Tom, your book title also suggests that leadership isn't always productive. Can you give some examples of what you might consider non-productive leadership?
Yeah, I would bet that everybody listening to this podcast has examples in their own history as well. But maybe some of the more common examples would be when a senior person is told that there's not enough resources. Like you've got a 10-person work center, but you've only got 7 people in the work center, but you're still expected to carry out all of the tasking that's in the guidance that you receive. So oftentimes that senior person abdicates their accountability and says, just get it done. Right. So that's one of the ways that it gets manifested. An area that many people don't equate with leadership is when there's not enough guidance in place either. Right. So remember that guidance includes policies, plans, processes, procedures, and measures. So whenever you see two groups that have a conflict or a disagreement, say an operations first shift and second shift, or operations and maintenance work centers on the same shift, there can be conflict or disagreements. When you see those, you can be pretty sure that there's a lack of guidance. And guidance really boils down to whether there are ambiguities, gaps, or overlaps, and because when you have ambiguities, gaps, and overlaps, it's questionable who has responsibility to do certain aspects. And when assets or resources are that are not needed, that are needed or not provided, that causes problems. So if the senior person is accountable to authorize changes to guidance and assets, the subordinate people that report to that leader are accountable to execute the current guidance with current assets. And they're also accountable to notify the person that's senior to them when there are deficiencies. So generally speaking, any leader that does not understand that their job is not to be a technical or professional expert, their job is the overall performance of their team. So when the leader clings to, being an expert or technician, that's another way that poor leadership is manifested. So they're doing the work of their team member, and they're not doing the work of, say, being a manager, administrator, a coach, or a systems thinker, or visionary, or working on their own personal development. So when you see those sorts of things, that's when you can, identify a problem with leadership.
Tom, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think a lot of folks who end up in leadership and management positions, they achieve those positions precisely because they were skilled. They had skills and talents as an individual contributor, maybe a maintenance technician. So it's kind of hard for them to let that stuff go.
Yeah, and Tim, the two hardest things for, say, if we're talking about a tradesman that's being promoted to a supervisory role, or even if, say, you're a staff engineer being promoted to engineering manager, the two most difficult things for a person new to leadership, what they have to learn, the two most difficult things are first putting down the tools, right? So to stop
Right.
being an expert technician. And what I say about that is somebody gave you the opportunity to learn your craft. So now you need to let your folks learn their craft. Obviously, if they get stuck, you should step in and help them when they ask for it. And the second thing is uh, being able to correct people that used to be your peers. So when you see somebody, when you're being attentive and you're watching and you're seeing somebody not following rules and regulations and policies and processes, speaking up and correcting their behaviors. And correcting those folks that they may still be your hunting and fishing buddies, but now you have to correct them because you're their boss.
Right.
And in the book, I talk about how to deal with those situations and many others.
So you talked about some of the mistakes that some leaders are making today. I wonder if you can cite any other common mistakes.
Oh boy, the list is endless. Yeah, I mean, if you think about, to me, everything boils down to direction, guidance, assets, and execution, right? So direction is mission, vision, values, and objectives. Uh, Guidance, as I said, are policies, plans, processes, procedures, and measures. Assets are the things needed to carry out guidance. And then execution are the individual leadership skills of the people who are accountable to execute, right? And
Right.
so, any of the things, if I think about, so when I talk about the productive leadership model, that is a leader provided with requirements and direction. And so requirements are the combination of guidance and assets, and direction is the mission, vision, values, and objectives. If a leader is provided with those things, then in order for them to execute, they need to know leadership roles, attributes, and skills. They need to know their sources of power. So, how can they get people to do things? And they need to understand how to influence others. And that's having an understanding of needs and motivation theories. And then they should also know how to set goals so that they can move towards those objectives. And so when you think about those things, anything that impacts or is deficient in those areas is a source of leadership problems, right? So when I talk about leadership roles, there's 5 roles. There's expert technician, uh, manager, administrator, coach, systems thinker, and visionary. So a common problem is if a leader is not managing their time correctly, they spend too much time as expert technician, probably not enough time on manager, administrator, and not enough time on coaching. And
Sure.
so when they're not doing enough manager administrator type things, they're not making sure that labor hours are being recorded. They're not managing the budget correctly. They're not procuring the tools and materials that the guys need, the men and women in the work center need to carry out their tasks. If they're not doing enough coaching, then they're not developing the people on their team and giving them those opportunities to learn. If they're not doing enough systems thinking, they're not identifying opportunities to improve the processes and procedures within their work center. And if they're not spending at least a little bit of time being a visionary, they're not seeing things outside of their group environment, and they're not identifying the technologies or the regulatory changes that may be coming down the pike.
Tom, I get the feeling that maybe we're putting the wrong people in leadership positions. Are organizations doing? I think I know the answer to this, but it sounds like organizations are doing a very good job choosing the people they put in leadership positions.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. Right now, it's especially a problem because the hiring, right now, the workforce is in the driver's seat with the way that the economy is going. And so, a lot of organizations are taking who they can get and trying to train them up on the critical things. But when I think about an organization that, say, has a high degree of turnover because, workforce personnel, if they can make $1 an hour better someplace else, they'll leave right now. And
Right.
so, how do you make it more sticky for people, make it harder for them to leave? Well, 80% of people tend to leave, over history. 80% of people leave because they work for a bad boss, not because
Right.
their compensation is poor, right? And so when you talk about not having the right, skills and abilities in the leadership team, that exacerbates that problem. And so if you look at different research, only about 10 to 12% of leaders have the full complement of understanding roles, attributes, skills, knowing their sources of power, etc. Now, the second chapter in my book, I talk about the human brain, and I do that because I want people to understand that they can learn throughout their lives. And I also want them to understand the linkage between creating memories, and you create memories by creating the right guidance, policies, plans, processes, procedures, and measures. So you're telling people what are the right behaviors that you want to be exhibited. And so people can learn those behaviors. And so when you do behaviors often enough, it creates a habit. And when the majority of people in an organization all have the same habits, that becomes the culture. So, so we can all learn how to be better leaders, but we have to be shown the information and we have to use that information.
There's also a lot of emphasis on individual training. I remember when I was coming up as an engineer, the companies that I worked for had internal training programs. You don't see that kind of stuff so much anymore. There's a lot more emphasis on people having to find the resources for training on their own.
Yeah, and this is another interesting thing, Tim, is that I started writing that article in Plant Services magazine over 11 years ago, and you know, one of the things that I kept pointing out is no matter what the training is, if it's technical training, professional training, leadership training, if it's butt in seat training, only about 10 to 20% of the information that is conveyed during that training session is retained. And it
Wow.
doesn't get retained because of, again, this is why I wrote the chapter on the brain. The way the human brain works is that new information that comes into our brain, we only retain it for a few seconds to a few minutes unless that information is repeated multiple times.
Right.
And so you sit in training for a day or 2 days or 4 days, whatever it is, and you load all this information into your brain. But it's the old adage, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? And
Right.
there's actually four ways that you can lock information into your brain. I won't go into it because we only have 20 minutes or so today. But there's different ways that you can lock the information into your brain. So I started looking at this from the leadership training perspective, and same thing, people would go to the Holiday Inn, get a day or 2 days of leadership training, and they would train them on time management, communication, empowerment, conflict management, giving and receiving feedback. And they'd go back to the plant and nothing would change. And the reason nothing changed was number one, because of the human brain, as we just discussed. But the second reason was that there was not a system in the plant that supported good leadership.
Right.
And that's why I call it the productive leadership system, maximizing organizational reliability, because the system hasn't changed. You can train people all day long, but if they go back into that system and the system hasn't changed, you're not going to get traction.
Right. Tom, let me come back to the topic of product reliability for just a minute. How is the current practice of leadership that you've seen making it harder to achieve product quality and reliability?
Oh yeah, so this is if you just think back to Deming and a lot of the things that he was espousing, you've got multiple functions within an organization, right? So uh, if you have multiple functions and you have one or two functions that are high performing within that environment, within that functions environment, but it's not interfacing with its peer functions or groups, there becomes conflict or silos, then you can't get to a high level of reliability and quality. So what we try to do then, that's why I try to attack this problem as calling it organizational reliability, because it goes across the entire organization.
Right. It kind of reminds me, Tom, a little bit. I think Duran was the one that said that 85% of the quality problems that we see are because of processes, not because of people.
Right. And Deming, a good person will be defeated by a bad process every time.
That's the truth. That's the truth.
And it's why I look at things, Tim. I always think about it as it's not the individual person, it's the system that they're working in, right? So
Exactly.
I certainly, within the model, I talk about the organizational reliability model. It applies across each leadership level, right? So a supervisor to their team member, a manager to the supervisors that report to them, and you keep going up the chain, right? So the plant manager to the department heads, that sort of thing, and the CEO to their direct reports, right? So it's across each level of leadership. There is a senior person and one or more subordinates that report to that person. The accountability for the senior person is to make sure that direction, guidance, and assets are provided and clear so that the people that report to them can execute it. The accountabilities for the subordinate person across each leadership level is to execute current guidance with current assets. Now, current guidance and current assets can be different than what the senior person authorized as the authorized guidance and authorized assets, right? So, therefore,
Right.
the subordinate person also has the accountability to notify the senior person when there's a deficiency in guidance or assets. And there's ways, people say, yeah, sure. So I've only got the 7 people in my work center, and I need 10. I tell my boss about it, and the boss says, well, just figure it out and get it done. Well, when the senior person does that, they're abdicating their accountability.
Yep.
And in the book and in my workshops, I explain how do you do that. And the simplest way I can explain it is in the military, I learned a phrase called "unless otherwise directed." Right?
Ah,
And so what that means is if my boss says just figure it out, I'm going to say fine, and I'm going to do this in writing in an email or some other form that's documented. I'm going to say, okay, so I only have 7 people. So these are the pieces of guidance that I'm no longer going to do because I don't have the manpower to do it.
right.
So otherwise directed, this is what I'm going to do. So in
Got
that
it.
case, the boss then doesn't respond, for instance. Okay, so he didn't respond, so that means he's concurring with my plan. He has the accountability. If he or she does respond and say, no, that's not what I want you to do, I want you to do this instead, then you got what you wanted. That person took accountability and gave you direction.
There you go. Boy, Tom, this has been great. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, absolutely. I loved it. And happy to do it again anytime.
Okay. That was Tom Moriarty, who is the president of Alidade MER Incorporated and the author of The Productive Leadership System, Maximizing Organizational Reliability, again, available through Amazon and Industrial Press. To learn more about Alidade and Tom's recent book, go to www.alidade, that's ALIDADE, -mer.com. We'll provide the link on the show notes for this recording. This is Tim Rogers. Thanks very much for joining us.